They said no one lasts a night inside that house, but when the lights went out, the screams didn't stop. This is the most haunted house in Texas, where the walls whisper, and the dead never left. They said the land was cursed long before the house was ever built, that no roots should have taken hold there, no life should have dared to grow. Locals whispered that the soil itself was poisoned, not by chemicals or decay, but by something unseen, something that remembered. Before the settlers came, before Texas had even been carved on a map, that land was a burial ground for those who were never meant to rest in peace. Graves dug shallow, spirits buried deep in rage. When the rain came, bones surfaced like the earth itself was spitting them out, refusing to keep the dead any longer. Generations passed, and the stories became legends, told to children to keep them from wandering too far from home at night. But legends have a way of clawing back into reality when people forget why they started. In the late 1800s, a man named Thomas Greaves bought that very piece of land for almost nothing. They said he was warned, but greed has a louder voice than caution. He wanted to build the grandest home in the county, a monument of wood and stone that would stand forever. But forever is a dangerous promise on cursed soil. The workers complained first, tools vanishing, strange humming at night, shadows moving against the firelight when no one was near. One man fell from the roof and swore, before his dying breath, that something pushed him. Another ran screaming into the woods and was never seen again. Thomas ignored them all. He kept building, brick by brick, until the house stood tall against the horizon like a defiance to everything that came before it. And for a while it was beautiful, white walls, oak floors, chandeliers that caught the sun like glass fire. But beauty is a disguise evil wears well. The first sign came on a moonless night. Thomas's wife, Eliza, heard knocking beneath the floorboards, steady, slow, deliberate. At first, she thought it was rats. Then she heard the whispering, voices calling her name in tones too soft to belong to any human throat. When she told Thomas, he laughed. But laughter doesn't protect you when the night begins to breathe. The next evening, the knocking returned, louder this time, until it sounded like fists pounding to be let out. Thomas tore open the floor the next morning, expecting to find nothing but dirt. Instead, he found a hole, deep, black, empty. But when he leaned closer, the air rose from it warm and foul, like breath. That night, Eliza's mirror cracked on its own, splitting her reflection into fragments she swore were smiling at her even when she wasn't. The animals started dying next. Horses refused to go near the house, dogs howled without stopping until they went mad, birds hit the windows as if something inside was calling them. And still Thomas stayed. He said there was no such thing as curses, that the mind plays tricks in the dark. But the dark was listening. It waited. On the seventh night after the hole was found, the storm came. Rain hit the windows like claws, lightning split the sky, and from beneath the earth came a sound that didn't belong in this world, a deep, guttural moan that made the walls tremble. Thomas ran to the basement to seal the hole, but what he saw down there froze him where he stood. The dirt was moving, rising, as if something beneath was crawling upward. He saw fingers, long, gray, rotten, breaking through the soil, reaching for him. He screamed, but no one heard him over the thunder. By morning, the storm had cleared. Eliza searched for her husband, calling his name through every hall, every room. The floorboards creaked under her feet, but the air was silent. When she reached the basement, the hole was gone, sealed, smooth, like it had never been opened. Only Thomas's hat lay on the dirt, soaked in blood. She left that house before nightfall and never returned. They say she went mad, her hair turning white in a single day. The neighbors found her wandering the fields, muttering about the ground breathing, about hands in the dark that wanted to pull her under. When they finally went to the house, they found it empty, quiet, as if it had been waiting for them all along. Years passed. The land was sold again and again. Every owner vanished, or worse. A preacher tried to bless it once, but the Bible burst into flames before he finished the prayer. The ground still shifts when it rains, and some nights, people say they see faces pressed against the windows, pale and hollow, watching the road. No one builds there now. Not anymore. The foundation still stands, cracked and hungry, like the earth beneath it is waiting for another soul foolish enough to stay. And if you ever find yourself driving down County Road 47 near midnight, you'll see it, the outline of a house that shouldn't be there, shimmering faintly in the dark. Some say it's just an illusion, a trick of moonlight. But if you stop your car, roll down your window, and listen closely, you'll hear it, the faint, steady knocking, coming from deep within the ground, counting down, waiting for someone to open the door again. The house had stood silent for decades, but silence never meant peace. It was a kind of waiting, the kind that hums beneath the air when something is remembering. They called them the Greaves family, the last to live there before the house sealed its fate. Husband, wife, 2 children, and a maid who never made it out. They were a picture of perfection, at least that's how it looked from the outside, white picket fence, laughter echoing through summer evenings, smoke curling from the chimney. But in that house, laughter always turned into whispers, and whispers always ended in screams. It began slowly, like the house was testing them. Doors closing on their own. Dishes falling and shattering at the same time every night. The youngest child, Clara, started talking to someone no one could see. She'd sit in her rocking chair by the window, staring into the yard, giggling softly as if listening to secrets. When her mother asked who she was speaking to, Clara said, "The people under the floor. They said we live in their house now." At first, the parents dismissed it as childish imagination, but then the smell began, something rotting, metallic, always strongest near the basement. The maid refused to go down there after sundown. She said she heard crying, soft and muffled, coming from the walls. One night, the crying turned into wailing, loud enough that the whole family woke up. Thomas Greaves, the father, stormed downstairs, lantern in hand. But when he opened the basement door, the light flickered and died. In that brief flash before darkness swallowed him, he saw handprints smeared on the wall, small, too small to belong to anyone alive. He called out, but his voice didn't echo. It was swallowed, as though the air had turned thick and listening. When he came back up, his face was pale, his eyes empty. He told his wife not to ask questions, not to go down there again. But secrets rot faster when they're buried. The next morning, Clara's rocking chair was empty. The window was open, though no one remembered unlocking it. They searched the entire house, calling her name until their voices cracked. No answer. The sheriff and half the town came to help, combing through the woods, the fields, even the nearby river. Nothing. Not a footprint, not a shred of fabric. Just gone. The mother stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She sat by that window every night, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. And sometimes, in the stillness, a faint giggle would echo back, as if Clara was playing hide-and-seek from the other side of the glass. A week later, the maid vanished too. Her room was undisturbed, her bed neatly made. The only sign of her was a smear of dirt leading from the hallway to the basement door, ending abruptly at the threshold, like she'd stepped into the dark and been erased. Then came the scratching. It started behind the walls, steady and slow, like fingernails dragging against wood. The mother begged Thomas to leave, to burn the place down if he had to, but he wouldn't. He said leaving would give it power. That's what made it worse. The scratching grew louder, then multiplied. Soon it was everywhere, ceilings, floors, the headboard of their bed. One night, the mother woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, light, uneven, like a child's bare feet. She ran out, calling Clara's name, but when she reached the stairs, the footsteps stopped. She turned, and saw muddy prints leading down toward the basement. Her breath caught. The prints were fresh, glistening wet. She followed them, trembling, the lantern shaking in her hand. The basement door creaked open by itself. From inside came the faint sound of a lullaby, one she used to sing to Clara when she was afraid of the dark. Her heart shattered. She stepped inside, whispering her daughter's name. Then the door slammed shut behind her, and her scream was the last sound anyone ever heard from that house again. When the sheriff returned days later, the place was still locked from the inside. They broke in. What they found froze their blood. The dining table was set for 4, plates spotless, candles burned down to stubs. Upstairs, the beds were made, clothes folded neatly. But the smell was overwhelming, sweet, thick, wrong. They followed it to the basement. The air was heavy, almost alive. The sheriff's lantern flickered as he descended the steps, his men trembling behind him. And then they saw it, 5 shapes, half sunk into the dirt, their faces turned toward the ceiling, eyes open, mouths frozen mid-scream. The sheriff swore he saw them twitch, like they'd only just been buried. He ran, leaving the others behind. When he returned with help the next morning, the basement was empty. No bodies. No footprints. Just that same hole in the ground, smooth and fresh, like the earth had swallowed them whole. The house was abandoned after that. No one dared go near it. But people claimed they still saw the lights flickering through the windows at night, shadows moving across the curtains. Travelers passing by said they heard laughter, soft, childlike, drifting from the yard. A few brave souls went inside over the years, chasing the legend. None stayed long. One man came out babbling about a family dinner still going on in the dining room, all 4 of them sitting there, smiling, motionless, their eyes black as oil. Another said he found toys laid out neatly on the floor, all facing the wall, and when he turned one around, it whispered his name. To this day, no one knows what really happened to the Greaves family. Some say the house took them, claimed them as its own. Others believe they never died at all, that they're still there, trapped between walls that breathe, waiting for company. And if you listen carefully on certain nights, you can hear them moving, footsteps pacing upstairs, chairs dragging across the floor, whispers seeping through the cracks. The sheriff's grandson once said he drove past it years later, out of curiosity. He stopped his car, turned off the engine, and rolled down the window. For a long moment, nothing. Then, faintly, from the darkness of the house, came a little girl's voice. "Mama," she said. "Come play." He drove away so fast he left his headlights off. He swore he saw her face in the rearview mirror, mud-streaked, eyes hollow, smiling. The next morning, his tires were covered in dirt, thick and wet, as if he'd driven through a graveyard that shouldn't have been there. The mirror had been in the house longer than anyone could remember, its frame carved from dark oak, edges lined with strange markings no one could read. It hung in the upstairs hallway between 2 bedrooms, always cold to the touch no matter how warm the house became. Locals said it belonged to the first owner, Thomas Greaves, and that it came from somewhere overseas, a gift, or maybe a curse. Over the years, people who dared to look into it too long said they saw things that weren't there. Not shadows, not reflections, but faces, faces that shouldn't exist. The house itself was unsettling, but that mirror held something different. It didn't reflect the world, it seemed to hold one of its own, a place where light couldn't reach and time didn't move. And when you looked into it, it didn't just show you, it watched you back. It began when the McAllister family moved into the house in the 1920s, ignoring the locals' warnings about the Greaves' disappearance. They wanted a fresh start, and the house was cheap. The father, Richard, a man of logic and science, laughed at the stories. His wife, Evelyn, however, felt uneasy from the first day. She said the air upstairs felt heavier, colder. The mirror caught her attention immediately. It was tall, elegant, perfectly polished despite its age. But what disturbed her most was how it seemed to hum when she passed by it, a faint vibration deep enough to feel in her bones. The children, a boy and a girl, would play in front of it, giggling as they made faces. Until one afternoon, the boy stopped laughing. He stared at his reflection, frozen, eyes wide. Evelyn asked what was wrong. He whispered that his reflection smiled before he did. That night, she covered the mirror with a sheet. The next morning, the sheet was gone. No one had touched it. When she asked the maid, the woman crossed herself and refused to go upstairs again. Evelyn tried to move the mirror, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if it had fused with the wall. Her husband mocked her fears, said she was imagining things, but every night after that, Evelyn would hear soft tapping sounds from upstairs, rhythmic and patient, like fingernails against glass. One night, she decided to face her fear. She lit a candle and went to the hallway alone. The mirror loomed in the dark, the candlelight flickering across its surface. For a moment, she saw only herself. Then, the flame wavered, and her reflection smiled, slowly, cruelly, while she stood completely still. Her breath caught. The reflection lifted a hand, dragging its fingers across the inside of the glass, leaving faint streaks that looked like scratches. Evelyn dropped the candle and ran. Her husband went up the next morning to prove nothing was wrong. The mirror was spotless. He looked at his reflection, smirking, but then frowned. His reflection wasn't smirking back. It was staring directly into his eyes with something like hatred. Before he could move, the glass rippled like water, and for a split second, he saw something standing behind him, tall, pale, eyes black and hollow. When he turned, nothing was there. He tried to convince himself it was just his mind playing tricks, but the reflection had changed slightly. The wallpaper behind him in the reflection was torn, though in reality, it wasn't. Days passed, and the family began to change. Evelyn stopped sleeping, the children stopped playing. The boy refused to go upstairs, crying that the mirror whispered to him when no one else was around. The whispers became a chant, a steady murmur in the silence of night. Sometimes, Evelyn would hear her name being called from the hallway, soft and pleading, but when she opened the door, she'd only see the faint outline of her own face staring back from the mirror, except the reflection was still moving when she wasn't. The maid quit, saying the mirror showed her something she couldn't unsee. The final night came during a thunderstorm. The power went out, and the house fell into darkness. Evelyn lit a lantern and searched for her husband, who hadn't come down for hours. She followed the sound of dripping water to the hallway and froze. The mirror was uncovered again, gleaming faintly in the lightning flashes. Something was moving inside it, not behind her, inside. It looked like her husband, but wrong. His face was twisted, mouth wide open in silent agony, eyes pleading. She stepped closer, whispering his name, and his hand pressed against the glass from the other side, fingertips leaving streaks of blood. She screamed and reached out, but the surface was ice-cold, solid. Then, the reflection smiled, not her husband, not anymore. The lantern flickered out. When the neighbors came the next morning, the house was silent. They found the children hiding in the closet, too terrified to speak. The father was gone. Evelyn was lying on the floor in front of the mirror, eyes wide open, her hand stretched toward it. The glass was spotless except for one faint print on the inside of the surface, as though someone had pressed from within. The police covered the mirror, but it refused to stay covered. Sheets would slide off, nails would loosen. Eventually, they boarded up the entire hallway. Still, at night, people said they saw a faint glow behind the boards, like something breathing on the other side. Over the years, the house changed owners, and each one had their own story. A collector once bought the mirror, thinking it an antique treasure. He hung it in his store. Within a week, he was found dead, his body twisted in front of it, eyes missing. The mirror was returned to the house by terrified workers who refused to touch it again. Another man tried to destroy it with a hammer, but the glass didn't crack. The reflection, however, changed. It showed him falling, screaming, long before it happened. That same night, he was found at the bottom of the stairs, neck broken, his eyes fixed on the spot where the mirror hung. Even now, the mirror remains there, untouched, undisturbed, but never quiet. Visitors claim they can feel a pull, a strange weight in their chest when they stand near it. Some swear they've seen faces, some human, some not, floating faintly in the glass, whispering things they can't quite understand. And if you stand in front of it long enough, the reflection begins to shift, almost imperceptibly, until it's not you anymore staring back. It's something older, hungrier, wearing your skin like a memory. The locals warn newcomers not to look too long, not to linger near that hallway. But curiosity is stronger than fear. They say the mirror remembers every face that's ever looked into it, and if you listen closely, you can still hear them, all the ones who never walked away, trapped behind the glass, pounding softly, waiting for someone else to take their place. It began with the laughter. Soft at first, like wind chimes in the dark, drifting through the empty halls when everyone was asleep. It wasn't cheerful, it wasn't innocent, it had a strange echo to it, like it came from somewhere deep inside the walls. The family that lived there after the McAllisters tried to ignore it, saying maybe it was just the old wood creaking, or the wind slipping through cracks. But laughter doesn't breathe. And this laughter did. Every night, at exactly 3 a.m., the sound returned. The same giggle, high and playful, followed by the faint sound of footsteps running down the hall. They thought it was their daughter, Emily, who had a habit of sneaking out of bed to play. But when her mother checked, Emily would be asleep, her small chest rising and falling, her toys untouched. Yet the laughter would continue, echoing down the corridor until it faded into silence. Then came the knocking. 3 slow knocks at her bedroom door. Emily would wake and whisper, "Mommy." But when the door opened, no one was there. Just the hallway, long and dimly lit, the air heavy and cold. The mother started sleeping with Emily, thinking it was just her imagination. One night, as she lay there half asleep, she felt the bed shift slightly, like someone small had climbed onto it. She opened her eyes, expecting to see Emily, but the child was still fast asleep beside her. Then she heard it, soft breathing, right by her ear. She froze. Slowly, she turned her head. Nothing. Just the faint outline of a shadow standing by the door, smaller than an adult but too still to be human. The breathing stopped. The shadow didn't move. Then, from across the room, came that same giggle. The shadow flickered once and was gone. Days turned into weeks. Emily started drawing strange pictures, figures without faces, a little girl standing in the corner, always smiling. When her parents asked who she was, Emily said, "That's my friend. She comes to play when you're asleep." Her father asked what her friend's name was. Emily looked up, her eyes wide and glassy, and whispered, "She doesn't have one anymore." Her mother threw the drawings away, but Emily just made more. Soon, she stopped eating, stopped playing with her toys. She'd just sit at the window, staring into the yard, humming that same eerie tune that no one had taught her. One night, Emily's father set up a camera in her room. He told his wife it was just to prove nothing strange was happening, to calm her nerves. The next morning, they watched the footage. For the first few hours, nothing. Emily tossed and turned in bed. Then, around 3 a.m., the door creaked open by itself. A small figure stepped inside, almost transparent. The room temperature on the monitor dropped by 10 degrees. The figure moved to the foot of the bed and just stood there. No face. No features. Just a shape. Then it leaned forward, closer and closer to Emily's sleeping face. The camera glitched, the screen turning to static. When the picture returned, Emily was sitting up, eyes open, staring directly into the camera. The father stopped the video and deleted it without saying a word. That night, he nailed the door to her room shut. The next day, Emily didn't wake up. She was breathing, but wouldn't respond. The doctor said she was in some kind of trance, her pulse slow, her body ice cold. They tried everything, medicine, prayers, even moving her to another room. Nothing worked. At exactly 3 a.m., the monitor in her new room flickered on by itself, showing the empty hallway outside. From the darkness, that same laughter echoed through the speaker, louder than before. The sound made the lights flicker. Then a shadow passed across the camera, and Emily's fingers twitched. The mother screamed for help, but when they reached her, Emily was standing in the middle of the room, eyes still closed, her face turned toward the door. She whispered something, too quiet to hear. The father leaned closer. "She's coming," Emily said, her voice not her own, lower, distorted, wrong. That night, the family locked every door and window. They stayed together in the living room, candles burning, praying the night would end quickly. The laughter came again. This time, it wasn't just upstairs. It was inside the house, circling them, bouncing off the walls. The candles flickered wildly, one by one snuffing out, until only one remained. The father held his daughter close, whispering that it was just the wind. But when he looked toward the stairs, his breath caught. A small figure was standing at the top step, watching them. It wasn't Emily. It had her height, her hair, but its eyes were empty black hollows. Its mouth stretched into a grin far too wide. It tilted its head, giggled, and started to descend, one slow step at a time. The mother screamed and grabbed Emily, running toward the back door. But the handle burned her palm, it was scorching hot. The air grew thick, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. The father shouted, throwing open the front door, but instead of the porch, there was only darkness, endless, suffocating black. He slammed it shut. The sound of small footsteps came closer, echoing through the hall. The laughter was now all around them, overlapping, dozens of voices giggling, whispering, calling Emily's name. The mother turned and saw the figure only a few feet away now, smiling, its head twitching like a puppet with broken strings. She clutched her daughter, crying, begging it to stop. The figure tilted its head again, then raised one small hand and pointed at Emily. Every candle went out. When the sun rose, the neighbors noticed the door to the house was open. Inside, everything was still. The family was gone. No sign of struggle, no blood, no footprints. Only the faint scent of burnt wax and a child's laughter faintly echoing through the hall. The police found the camera again, its red light still blinking. The footage showed the family sitting together, terrified, staring toward something off camera. Then, one by one, their faces turned toward the lens, their eyes pitch black, their mouths forming the same distorted smile. The tape ended with the sound of soft, childish laughter. Years later, when new owners dared to move in, they'd hear it again. Always at 3 a.m. The faint patter of small feet, the sound of a giggle drifting through the dark, and a child's voice whispering, "Come play." Those who stayed too long said they began to see her, a little girl with tangled hair and a cracked porcelain face, peeking from behind doors or standing at the end of the hall. Some say she's Emily. Others say she never existed at all, just another voice the house created to lure the living closer. But the laughter never stops. It just waits for silence. Because in that house, 3 a.m. isn't the dead of night, it's playtime. They always said the basement was forbidden, even before the house was abandoned. The old blueprints showed it shouldn't have been that big, but those who went down there said it stretched farther than the house above it, deeper than any foundation should go. The air down there was wrong, too still, too heavy, like the earth was holding its breath. Every owner of the house had locked that door eventually, but somehow, it always opened again, the rusted hinges creaking slowly at night when the wind wasn't blowing. The first time someone went missing in that basement, the townsfolk decided it was just an accident. The second time, they stopped making excuses. They called it the Forbidden Room, the place where the living shouldn't linger. But curiosity always wins, and curiosity feeds the house. The last known family that lived there before it was sealed were the Harts. They were a young couple with a teenage son, drawn by the low price and the promise of peace outside the city. The first few days were fine, quiet, almost too quiet. But on their fourth night, the boy, Daniel, heard something coming from below. It wasn't footsteps. It was humming. A low, rhythmic tune that rose from the basement through the vents. His parents said it was the pipes. But pipes don't hum lullabies. Daniel began hearing it every night at the same time, 2:47 a.m., a voice, low and melodic, echoing faintly up the stairs. One night, he pressed his ear to the basement door and swore he heard someone whisper his name. When he told his father, the man checked the lock himself, muttering that old houses make strange noises. But the next morning, the lock was broken, hanging by a single screw. They tried ignoring it. But the smell came next, earthy, damp, metallic. It crept through the floorboards, thick and suffocating. The mother began having dreams about a room filled with dirt, walls that moved, whispers rising like steam. Every morning, she woke with dirt beneath her fingernails, though she hadn't left her bed. Daniel grew obsessed. He wanted to see what was down there, to prove something was living beneath their feet. His father forbade it, even nailed the door shut. But nails didn't matter to whatever was below. On the seventh night, the humming changed. It wasn't a tune anymore. It was words, faint, slurred, but unmistakably human. Daniel couldn't resist. He grabbed a flashlight and went down. The stairs creaked under his feet, each step groaning like it didn't want to be touched. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. The smell was stronger now, and the light barely reached the bottom. When his foot touched the last step, he saw the dirt floor shimmer slightly, like it was breathing. He called out, his voice trembling, echoing into the black. No answer. Then, from the far corner, he saw movement, a slow, deliberate shift in the shadows. His flashlight flickered, and when it came back on, there was a door. He didn't remember seeing one before. It was smaller than the rest, half buried in the wall, carved with strange marks that seemed to pulse faintly as he stared at them. His breath fogged in the air. He reached for the handle. The moment his fingers brushed the metal, the humming stopped. The silence was unbearable. Then came the whisper, right behind him. You shouldn't be here. He turned, and the flashlight hit the wall, bare, empty, except for a faint smear of something wet. He dropped the light. The door creaked open on its own. When his parents found the basement door open the next morning, Daniel was gone. They called the police, who searched the house, then the property, then the woods. No sign of him. His mother screamed that he was still in the basement, but the officers found nothing but dirt and dust. They sealed the door again, but that night, the humming returned, faint, sad, and this time, it was Daniel's voice. His mother refused to leave the house. She'd sit outside the basement door for hours, whispering to him, begging him to come back. Then, one night, she disappeared too. The father was found sitting in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall, repeating the same words over and over, the door won't stay closed. He was taken away, and the house was left empty. Years later, when a team of investigators came to explore, they found the basement untouched. But their cameras malfunctioned the moment they stepped down. One man swore he heard crying. Another said he saw footprints appear in the dirt ahead of him, small, bare, as if someone invisible was leading them deeper. The air grew thick, their lights dimming as if the darkness itself was swallowing them. When they reached the far wall, they found the same buried door Daniel had described in his notes. They filmed as one of them reached for it, their hands shaking. It's just a room, he said. But when the door opened, it wasn't a room behind it. It was a tunnel, narrow, endless, descending into blackness. The dirt inside was warm, like skin. Then something moved inside the tunnel, too fast to see, dragging itself toward them. The camera fell, capturing only the sound of screaming and the thud of footsteps racing up the stairs. When the backup team arrived, they found the basement empty again. Only the door was left open, the tunnel gone, replaced by smooth, untouched dirt. The recordings were recovered, but the audio was distorted. A faint voice could be heard beneath the static, humming that same lullaby. Experts said it sounded like a child. Others said there were multiple voices, layered, whispering the same word over and over, "Stay." No one has entered the basement since. The door is still there, sealed with iron chains, though locals say they hear it rattle on stormy nights, as if something is pushing from the other side. Sometimes, if you drive by the old Greaves house after midnight, you can see a faint light glowing through the cracks in the basement window. If you listen carefully, over the crickets and the wind, you'll hear it, the soft humming of a lullaby rising from deep within the earth. Some say it's Daniel, still trapped, still calling for help. Others believe it's the house itself, luring another soul closer. A few people claimed they saw a small hand pressed against the glass from the inside, leaving behind a print in the fogged-up window. When they wiped it away, there was dirt beneath the glass, shifting, as if something underneath was trying to dig its way out. The forbidden room remains untouched, but the earth beneath it isn't quiet. It waits, humming softly, patient as time itself. And every now and then, the chain around the basement door loosens, just slightly, as if the house is breathing again, remembering the last one who dared to open it. The diary was discovered inside a hollow brick wall behind the fireplace during a renovation. The pages were stiff with age and dark stains that had bled through the parchment. The ink seemed to have mixed with something thicker, something that reeked of iron and decay. At first glance it looked like any old journal belonging to the house's first owner, Mary Winchester, but as the new owner turned the brittle pages the words began to crawl into his mind. Like whispers from another world. The handwriting started elegant, neat, but the deeper he read the more erratic it became. Jagged letters carved with fury as if written by trembling hands on the edge of madness. The first entry spoke of a happy home, a husband, 2 children, and dreams of turning the house into a sanctuary, but by the 5th page the tone shifted. She began to hear footsteps in the hallway when everyone else was asleep. She wrote of breathing sounds right next to her ear. When she prayed in her room she wrote of cold fingers touching her neck. When she stood near the window she described seeing a shadow pacing outside. Though the land was empty and still, there was no mention of fear. At first only confusion, but by the time the reader reached the 10th page the confusion had turned into desperation. She wrote that the voices would not stop calling her name from beneath the floorboards. She said she heard her son crying there even when he was asleep in her arms. The ink turned darker, the handwriting rougher. She mentioned a mirror that refused to show her reflection but instead showed a tall figure standing behind her. She smashed it, but the reflection kept appearing in every reflective surface, every spoon, every window, every drop of water. She saw its silhouette, long fingers bending like branches, and a smile that didn't belong to any living thing. The diary described how her husband began to change too. His eyes turned hollow, he stopped eating, he stopped speaking, and one morning she woke up to find him standing at the foot of the bed staring at her without blinking. She wrote that his lips moved but no sound came out. When she reached out to touch him he dissolved into shadows, leaving behind the smell of smoke and burnt wood. By now the reader could feel the air around him grow heavier, as if the diary itself was alive. The pages seemed to pulse with faint warmth. He continued reading, unable to stop. The words had a rhythm like a chant. She wrote of her daughter who began drawing strange symbols on the walls with her own blood. At night she would sit by the door whispering to something only she could see. The mother begged for mercy, prayed to God, burned sage, but the shadows only laughed. One entry written in shaking letters said, "It wants us to stay, it doesn't let anyone leave." She described the house as a mouth and them as its food. The walls dripped with water that smelled like rot. She tried to escape, but each time she reached the road it would loop back to the front gate. She realized she was walking in circles inside a space that had no end. The last pages were nearly unreadable, some words scratched over others, the lines dug deep as if written in panic. "It comes through the mirror, it wears his face now, it told me to write." The reader turned the final page and saw something smeared across it, not ink but something brownish and flaked like dried blood. There were no words, only the imprint of a hand the same shape and size as his own. That night he dreamed of a woman sitting by the fireplace, whispering his name, her eyes hollow, her face pale, the diary open on her lap. The next morning the pages were blank, every word gone as though erased by unseen hands, but the fireplace was warm and faint smears of black ash traced words along the stone. "You finished my story, now I can begin yours." The man tried to burn the diary but it refused to catch fire. Instead the flames bent away from it, hissing as if in defiance. When he threw it outside into the mud he found it back on his table the next Morning opened to a new page, and on that page were his own words written in his handwriting, recounting everything he had done since finding it. The entries continued day by day, recording even his thoughts. The diary knew when he lied, it knew when he tried to leave, and each attempt was recorded before it happened. It became a mirror of his mind, showing him things he hadn't yet done. He stopped sleeping, he stopped eating, and the words kept appearing faster and faster until he couldn't tell if he was writing them or if the diary was moving his hand. One night his neighbor reported hearing him screaming, the sound of pages tearing and glass breaking. When police arrived, they found the house empty, only the diary lying open on the floor. The final entry was dated that night, written in a different hand, one that looked painfully familiar. It read, "He came through the mirror, he took my name. Now the house has another story to tell." After that no one lived there for long. Every new tenant found the diary, no matter how many times it was taken away, and each time a new hand began to write as if compelled, drawn by something ancient and hungry. The book waits quietly in the dust, its cover pulsing faintly under the light like something breathing. And if you ever visit that house in Texas, the one everyone avoids, you might hear the faint rustle of pages turning by themselves, a whisper from within saying, "Come, read your story next." The scream was first heard on a windless night in 1978 when a group of teenagers broke into the abandoned Winchester house on the outskirts of El Paso. They had heard the stories, the disappearances, the lights flickering in empty windows, but curiosity had teeth and youth never believes the warnings. The front door was swollen shut from years of rain and rot. When they pushed it open, it groaned like something in pain. The air that poured out was colder than the desert night, thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic. One of them, a boy named Travis, laughed nervously and said the house was breathing, but his joke died when they heard it, the faint sound of crying from somewhere deep within. It was the kind of sound that didn't come from the throat, it came from the walls, like the house itself was remembering something awful. They followed it through a hallway lined with portraits, their painted eyes tracking them. The deeper they went, the more the sound changed, until the crying became a soft humming, a woman's voice, low and broken. One of the girls called out asking if someone needed help, but the voice stopped instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. They reached the end of the hall and found a door chained shut with old rusted links. Scratched words were carved into the wood, "Do not open or you'll hear her too." Travis laughed again, nervous, desperate to prove he wasn't afraid, and began to pull at the chain until it snapped. The door creaked open, revealing a spiral staircase descending into blackness. The air that came from below was heavy, moist, it carried the smell of earth and old blood. They went down one by one, the beam of their flashlight shaking over rotted steps. Halfway down they heard the humming again, louder, closer. The voice was behind them, but when they turned around there was nothing, only shadows moving like smoke. When they reached the bottom they found a small stone room with an old iron chair bolted to the floor. Chains dangled from the ceiling, and the walls were covered in scratch marks as if someone had tried to claw their way out. In the corner lay a gramophone, its horn twisted like a serpent, and beside it a single candle burned, though no one had lit it. The flame stood perfectly still, no flicker, no wind. One of the boys picked up the record next to it and placed it on the gramophone. It began to spin on its own. A soft crackling sound filled the air, followed by a voice, a woman whispering so quietly they had to lean in to hear. He never stopped screaming. The record began to distort, the whisper rising into a wail, then a shriek, then an unearthly scream that filled the room like pressure, like something tearing reality itself apart. They covered their ears, but the sound wasn't just in the air, it was in their heads, vibrating inside their skulls. They dropped the flashlight and the beam spun wildly across the walls, where shadows twisted into faces, hollow eyes, gaping mouths frozen in terror. When the light finally stopped, it shone on the chair, and in it sat a woman, her hair long and matted, her skin gray and cracked like dry earth. Her eyes were open and black, her mouth stretched impossibly wide, and from that mouth came the same scream, high and endless. The candle went out, plunging them into darkness. The last thing any of them saw was her face, inches away, her breath cold enough to burn. When the police found the house days later, they only discovered Travis sitting on the floor near the staircase, his hair white, his eyes staring at nothing. He wouldn't speak except to whisper one line over and over, "She's still screaming." He died 2 weeks later in a psychiatric ward, his vocal cords ruptured as though he had been screaming for days. The house was sealed again, boarded up by the authorities, but people who live nearby swear they still hear that scream. Some nights it starts faint, barely audible, then rises until the windows of nearby homes tremble. Animals refuse to go near the property, birds never perch on its roof, and no matter how many times the boards are nailed shut, they always come loose, as if something inside is pushing to get out. Years later, a paranormal team entered, determined to record proof of what they called residual hauntings. They set up cameras in every room, sensors along the floor, and a recorder in the basement where the scream was said to originate. At 2:37 a.m. all equipment malfunctioned, every battery drained in seconds, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and through their static-filled audio Came a faint sound like wind but rhythmic like breathing, then came the scream again, piercing their headphones, raw and human yet too loud to come from one throat. One by one the team fled, leaving their gear behind. The footage recovered later showed only one clear frame just before the scream began, the image of a woman standing at the bottom of the stairs, her mouth wide open, her eyes fixed on the camera, her hands reaching upward as if pulling the viewer toward her. Since then the scream has become part of the town's legend, a warning to anyone who ventures too close. Locals say the sound doesn't just echo through the air, it moves through the ground, through the pipes, through the bones of anyone who hears it. Those who've listened too long begin to dream of her. They wake at night gasping, convinced they heard her scream from inside their own walls. Some claim it changes each time you hear it. Sometimes it's full of rage, sometimes sorrow, and sometimes laughter, like she's mocking you for coming closer. Those who've studied the house's history say the scream belongs to Mary Winchester herself, the woman who vanished with her family all those years ago. The night before her disappearance, neighbors heard a long shriek that carried across the fields and ended abruptly as if cut short. Since then every recording, every attempt to capture the sound fails to replay properly. It always distorts, becomes louder until it bursts speakers and shatters glass. One researcher swore he could hear words hidden beneath the noise when slowed down. Help me, he won't stop, he won't die. But no one else could verify it because the file corrupted within hours. People say if you stand in front of the house long enough, the scream begins quietly like wind moving through a crack in the door, then it grows until it's behind you, whispering through your hair, and if you turn around fast enough you might see her reflection in the window, her mouth open wide, frozen in an eternal cry for escape. It said that the last person who heard it up close didn't survive. They found his body outside the gate, his hands pressed against his ears, his eyes wide, his face twisted in terror, his throat torn apart as if something had ripped the scream straight out of him. And yet on windless nights, when the moonlight hits the house just right, you can still hear it drifting across the empty fields, that same long high scream echoing through the dark, not fading, not stopping, just circling endlessly like the house itself, breathing, waiting for another listener to take her place.